In the youth class, we've been talking about courage, and some of you haven't heard of any of those lessons, so this will be like completely new to you. Actually, new to all of you, sort of, but because I know you know nothing of courage. Just kidding. But there's a reason why we decided to talk about courage, and this is kind of how it's really what causes you to get something done. I mean, it's what causes you to put your faith in action. It's what causes you to go out on a limb and do those things. I mean, and so courage is super, super, super important. And when you think about, stories of people that came before Jesus, there was an amount of courage that they had to have to come to him. Like you think about that woman with the issue of blood, it took her courage to go and touch the hem of his garment. And I will say, welcome. I went to the wrong door. That's the exit door. You gave us all the virus. Just kidding. So we've been talking about courage, and courage is a super, super important thing to have. And we need it at every aspect of life. A lot of times when we think of courage, we think of like some hero, something heroic done. But I mean, actually, we all need courage. Some people need courage just to step outside. Some of y'all need courage to go to church today. I mean, with all people talking about coronavirus, it took a little bit of courage or a little bit of stupidity for you to come to church. That's what it took. And so there's a lot of things in life that take courage. It doesn't necessarily mean that you got to jump on a hand grenade, and save your buddy. It does mean that, but for certain, sometimes that's what life is about. It's about having courage, and that's kind of how our walk with God is too. It takes courage. Courage to seek the Lord. Going to the altar for the very first time. That took courage. And to really seek the Lord, to let go and just seek him with all you had while all these weird people are watching you and massaging you and weird things like that, or punching you or spitting on your face. That took courage. That's what going to the altar is like the first time. There's a lot of things in our lives that take courage. And that's what we've been kind of talking about, courage. And I'm not going to go into all the definitions and stuff. I gave you a little bit about why it's important. And it's one of the most important things, really, that we have. There's all throughout the Bible, there's verses saying, fear not. I mean, that's what the angel said when he appeared to Mary. Fear not. And what if she would have? I'm sure she was a little frightened, a little startled. But, fear probably could have kept Mary from going through with the whole thing. She could have said, no, I don't want that baby. I don't want Jesus. I don't want that thing. Get away from me, you scary angel. She could have done that. So courage is something super important. And we're going to talk about a certain character today. I don't know if we'll get through it or not. We'll see. I probably can't get through it. But it's a good story. I want to kind of take my time on it. We're going to talk about a character in a book that's not about him necessarily. The story of Esther is a beautiful story in the Bible about God's people getting the victory over an enemy. Chances are you've heard this story before. An orphan Jewish girl wins a beauty contest and becomes queen. An enemy tries to destroy her people. Warned of this, Esther walks before the king without being summoned, an offense which could mean death. The king raises his scepter, sparing her life, and then Esther saves her people from genocide. When we talk about the story of Esther, a lot of times our focus is on Esther. And rightly it should be. But many times we focus on the heroism of Esther, who boldly approached the king and pled for her people. But there is another hero in the story of Esther that oftentimes gets overlooked. Now, this lesson is not to diminish the heroism of Esther's contribution, but rather to point out the great heroism and courage of Mordecai. I mean, Esther, the book's about her. It's called the Book of Esther. But actually, when you look at the story of Esther, there's another hero in there that deserves recognition, and that is Mordecai. Now, who was Mordecai? Esther chapter 2, verse 5 says, Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. So Mordecai, first of all, it points out he's possibly related to King Saul. Saul was a Benjamite, and these characters, you can find these characters' names in the life of David. Whether or not they are the same, like Shimei, for instance, he was the guy that cursed David when treated him bad. After Absalom rebelled, Shimei was that guy. But, I mean, then those might not necessarily be those people. I mean, they could be other people with the same name. But it is very possible that Mordecai was a relative, a descendant of King Saul. And here's another point. Mordecai was a captive Jew. He had been forced to go, under Babylon. It was no longer under Babylonian rule. It was under the rule of the Medes and Persians. But he was a captive Jew. He was basically a slave, and he dwelt in Shushan, which was the capital of the empire of the Medes and Persians. Now, he worked in the palace, probably as a servant, probably at the king's gate. He could be, some people surmise that he could have been a eunuch, because there's no wife mentioned. And the fact is that he's allowed to be at the court of the women, which was, at that time, believe it or not, as weird as their society was and as bad as they mistreated women, they had a big separation between men and women. And so that was a part of the city that he may have been able to go into because he was a eunuch, which is, hopefully that doesn't happen to any of you around here. Hopefully you're not enslaved and done that too. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was that, but there's some people that think he was. So Mordecai is not necessarily in the best situation possible. Now, and we also know that Jews were not treated very kindly because he tells Esther not to tell anyone who her family is or what her nationality is. Okay, here's the first maybe not the first, but the first courageous thing that I'm going to talk about that Mordecai did. The first thing he did was Mordecai raised Esther. He had courage not just to raise her, but to love Esther. And it's pointed out in Esther chapter 2, verse 6 through 7, and he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So, Esther was his, you could probably go into, according to the King James Version, that's his uncle's daughter. So, Esther is his cousin. And his cousin's parents died. She's a girl. And Mordecai takes her in and raises her as his own. And that takes love and that takes dedication. Not everyone would want that burden. Especially if he's a single parent, a single father. We don't know that for sure, but there's no wife mentioned in the Bible. He could have had one, but the Bible doesn't mention her at all if he did. And fatherhood takes dedication. But this was voluntary dedication. He probably did not have to take Esther in. He probably could have viewed her as a burden that would hurt his lifestyle. But he chose to adopt Esther and to take in this orphan girl. And not only did he take her in, but he loved her and cared for her. And I just want to ask you this question. How would Esther have been without the support of Mordecai? Would she have had the excellent spirit that helped her to gain favor with the people in the palace? She could have ended up a very, very bitter person that was wrecked by the tragedy of the loss of her parents. But Mordecai took her in and loved her and cared for her, and that took courage. He took responsibility when he probably didn't have to. And he was just a cousin, but he took her in as his own. What would have happened to Esther if Mordecai had not chosen to adopt her? would she have been queen? We don't know. But I doubt not. Because as an orphan on the streets, life is not so great. So what happens next? Let's give a little background information. Our story takes place in the land of the Medes and Persians. They were the dominant empire in the world at this time. The king is, and according to King James Version, is Ahasuerus. It's actually probably Xerxes, is actually probably the real name of him. The Greek name of Ahasuerus. He was married to Vashti. Vashti, the queen, disrespects the king openly in front of a whole big group of people. And this was a public thing. It was like in front of his court, in front of all the noblemen, in front of everybody. She disrespects him, disobeys the king. And in that society, the king's word was to be obeyed. It was to be law. And basically, and if people in his own family aren't going to respect the king, he didn't deserve to be king. And that's what his advisors were telling him. And so they said, you need to get rid of Vashti as queen. You need to get her out of there. Get rid of her, because every single wife in the kingdom is going to just treat their husband that way, because this is the precedent that you are setting if you allow this to continue. And so, since this happened so publicly, Ahasuerus was strongly advised to get rid of his wife, to set examples for wives everywhere. That's their society, that's what happened. And that's what Ahasuerus does. He divorced her to set an example. And actually they sent out a big letter in every language of every country they conquered, telling about the situation. And like, let this be a lesson to your wife. It's your duty to obey and respect your husband. That's basically what happened. Now, after he ceased to be angry, he kind of regretted this. And he began to regret what happened and the things that had happened. He was getting kind of pouty, and so his advisors came up with a solution. And they said, okay, we'll have a compulsory draft and a contest. So in every province of the kingdom, there were officers, like every state. I don't know how many states there were in the empire of the Medes and Persians, but they had officials that would go out and they would find all the beautiful women and they would take them to the palace. And from these women that were taken, probably whether they wanted to go or not, they would find a queen for the king. And Esther was one of these women that was taken. As a fair young virgin, she was taken away from her home to the harem. And now Mordecai is able to speak to her before she goes, and he tells her, don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. Don't tell anyone. I mean, this is kind of why I think he is a descendant of Saul, because he says, don't tell them your kindred. Don't tell them your family. So he's saying, don't tell them you're Jewish, and don't tell them who your family is, because that could create problems for you. And so you can see Mordecai's love for Esther, because he checks up on her as often as he can. He doesn't just say, oh well, bye. See you later. Good riddance. I've got more income now. I can eat more macaroni and cheese now because Esther's gone. No, he's checking up on her every day at the palace as much as he can, and he's doing what he can. Now, he's not supposed, men weren't really supposed to talk to women or things like that in that type of society. They were pretty bashful about the relations between the different genders. They were very bashful about it at that time. But every day he would go to check on Esther, how she was doing. And I want to just say, sometimes adopted children feel very discouraged that they're not with their real birth parents. But here's the thing, birth parents don't choose their children. But when you are adopted, you are chosen. And it almost is extra special. The fact, my parents didn't get to choose me. They probably would have chosen someone beautiful like Hunter. Someone strong like Kayla. They would have chosen someone strong like Caleb. And instead, they end up with the weak, sniveling brat, me. But they're forced to love me because I wasn't adopted. But, so in a way, adoption is, I mean, a birth thing it is a special thing. But adoption is a special thing too because you're chosen. Loving parents are great things. Love is courageous. Putting up with a screaming, crying baby is courageous. Putting up with a whiny teenager is courageous. Providing for children, teaching children, raising a child, disciplining a child is a courageous thing. Usually when you think of children with single parents, you think of a problem child. But Esther's attitude and character were wonderful. And it resulted in her becoming queen. And it's because she had a loving, adopted parent named Mordecai. And no doubt, Mordecai was instrumental in Esther, helping Esther to become the person that she became. Okay, so I'll just let you know, all of you have a chance to be adopted. And I'll let you know that Galatians 4:5 says that's why, it says to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Wherefore thou art no more servant, but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. So I'm just going to tell you, God wants to adopt you. So your parents may not want you, but God wants to adopt you. So I know your parents are annoying, Eliza, but Jesus wants to adopt you. So, okay, here's the second courageous thing. Okay, I've got a little bit of time. Okay, courage to get involved. Mordecai here overhears, he was doing his job at the king's gate, probably, or trying to check on Esther, and he overhears a plot against the king. There was some rough-sounding guys, and they were talking about this assassination plot to kill the king. Their names were, what is it, Bigthan. It's like Andrew. It's more like Jonathan, but like my brother's name is Jonathan. So Bigthan. So it's like a bigger than version of my brother. Bigthan. That's a good name for a child name, baby name. So if you guys are interested in that. Bigthan and Teresh, both very mean-sounding names. I mean, Teresh sounds like terrorist kind of, but it's like very cool. Bigthan and Teresh. And here's these guys. These were guys in the king's palace. These were influential people, chamberlains, and they were just talking about how they had this plot to kill the king. And what Mordecai does is he tells the captain of the guard about these guys. And the captain of the guard says, well, I'll check it out and investigate it. And so they went and did an investigation. And I don't know how they did investigations back then. But they discovered that this was indeed a credible attempt on the president's, on the king's, the emperor's life. And so they threw those guys in jail. And Mordecai helped put them in. He helped put those guys in jail. I mean, he saves Ahasuerus' life. So that's another courageous thing that Mordecai does. And a very courageous thing. All right, another courageous thing that Mordecai does. Now, there was a nobleman in the court of King Ahasuerus named Haman. And Haman was the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. And this probably means that he was a descendant of King Agag. Which I don't know if you know who King Agag was. But King Agag was the king of the Amalekites that Samuel killed because Saul wouldn't do it. So this is probably a descendant of Agag. I don't know if it's someone that escaped or he's a descendant. I don't know. That's what he is, a descendant of Agag. Who, by the way, he was an enemy of Saul, of Mordecai's family. So they probably would have had bad blood anyways between these people. And so we don't really know what Haman did, but he was a very ambitious type of person. And he quickly rose through the ranks of King Ahasuerus' court. And he became the chief of the princes. Like this was like almost the second in command in the empire. Haman became this because of the things that he did. He rose above all the rest. I don't know if he bribed or killed his way up to the top, but he became the second most powerful guy in the kingdom, chief of the princes of the King Ahasuerus. And so the king commanded all the people, all the servants, I should say, all the servants of the king to bow to Haman every time that he walked by. Because they believed the kings has divinity. Their word was law. They would basically worship the king in that type of society. The king was law. It was basically God on earth, you might say, pretty much. And the king said, and every time Haman comes by, all you servants, you have to bow down to him. So, what did Mordecai do? He didn't bow. He refused to bow. And there were other servants around there that they were saying, well, you need to bow down. The king said that you got to bow down to this guy, so you need to do it. And Mordecai would not do it no matter what. And the reason why is because they treated their kings and their people as divinity. And he thought, and it was because of his religion that did it. He didn't do it just because he thought Haman was a snob. But he thought, this is idolatry, and I do not need to worship a man like I would worship God. And he did this. It was for religious reasons. He wasn't just being a jerk. This was a religious conviction that he had. And he's like, I'm not going to bow to this guy named Haman. Not going to do it because that would be worship. And I'm not going to do that. That takes courage. That takes principles. And that's what he had. Okay. So Haman, being the jerk that he was, he notices Mordecai not bowing to him. And he's like, I want to get rid of that Mordecai guy. I know what I can do. I can kill him and all of his people. And Haman from that moment began to plot to kill all the Jews. Because he'd heard that Mordecai was a Jew. And he's like, I'm going to kill all the Jews. I'm going to do it. And he came up with a plan to do it. He went to the king and he said, hey, there's a group of people in your empire that just corrupt everything they touch. They're evil, they're wicked, they're just terrorists. Just need to get rid of these people. And like, well, that sounds like a good idea. We should get rid of those corrupt people that are just mess up everything. And he's like, I trust you. You're like my most trusted guy, Haman. So you go ahead. Here's my signet ring, giving you the power, and here's some money so that you can do this. And so Haman had a plot in place to take care of the Jews. Okay. Mordecai hears about the plot, and he has courage to get humble, because he puts on sackcloth and ashes. And sometimes being a man isn't just about looking cool and looking brave. Sometimes we have to know when to get humble and when we need to get on our knees and pray to God. And that's what Mordecai does. He gets down on his knees, he gets in sackcloth and ashes, and he prays, and he humbles himself before the Lord, and he fasts. And he finds a way to talk to Esther. And he gives her a wonderful, wonderful speech about how she needed to go and intercede before her husband, the king, on behalf of all the people. And he says this awesome, awesome thing to Esther. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He's like, Esther, you might be the one that God has chosen to save your people. You might be here. Who knows? You might be here. There might be a reason, Esther, you were in this place, in this position. He gives Esther this speech. And he said, and an awesome, awesome thing in it. And I probably should read the whole thing, but I'm trying to go quick so we can get out of here. But would Esther have went in before the king without Mordecai doing this speech? Probably not. She would have probably never even heard that because she was in the court of the women. They did not get the news of all the politics and things that went on. But Mordecai, because of her, Esther goes up before King Ahasuerus. Okay, we're going to go real quick. So, you guys all know that story, so I think you all know that story of Esther. If you don't, and you want me to talk more about that story, I can do that. But I'll have to do it another time because we've got to get through this quick. So Esther goes in before the king. She saves her people because the king's like, whoa, you're so beautiful. I'll just do whatever you want. I'll give you everything, Esther, because you're just such a pretty baby. And that's pretty much what he did. But what happens, I mean, it wasn't easy to save her people because the king had already set this thing into motion, and the king's word was law. Like, it could not be changed. Thankfully, we can change our laws now, but at that time, you could not change them. And so, really, what happened, Mordecai takes the place of Haman. He becomes pretty much second command in the empire of the Medes and Persians. In fact, he organizes the protection of his people with Esther. But it's really him doing the work. He's doing the administration. He's doing the things. He came in with a plan. He came in with the ability and the skills to organize that stuff and to organize the defense of his people against Haman's plot. And this is Esther 9, 3-5. It says, and all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews because of the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. I mean, so this really points out the contribution that Mordecai had, that he did something, and with that position that they took from Haman after Haman was killed on the very own gallows that he had made for Mordecai. And not only that, Mordecai he probably, I don't know if he wrote the book of Esther, but he records these events that happened, and he established a holiday of remembrance. And that is really, it's the festival of Purim that Jews celebrate to this day. I mean, it's kind of the Hanukkah thing, and that started there with him. I'm not Jewish, so I probably got some of that wrong, so I have to ask Erica about that stuff. But one stands. Got it. That's the legacy of Mordecai. So here we got, yes, Esther was heroic, but there was someone else in the background that helped her. And a lot of times we need other people. And I'm saying, they say this, behind every great man is a great woman. That's one thing they say, but it may not be a woman. It could be a dad. It could be a mother. It could be an adopted person. It could be a friend named Kaylee or Zach or Ada. Sometimes it just takes courage that's what we need in this day and age. We need people of courage and strength. So let's be courageous in our worship and courageous out there in this sanctuary. So get out of here and go be courageous. Like Mordecai and Esther.